All right, welcome back to another episode of Theology Applied. I am your host, Pastor Joel Webbin with Right Response Ministries, and in this episode, I am welcoming back for the third time a returning guest, Dr. Tim Chaffey. Tim, thanks for coming back.
Hey, it's my privilege, Joel. Thanks for having me on again.
Absolutely. So for those of you who are maybe just tuning in and you haven't seen our previous episodes, here's the plan. We are doing a mini 4-part series covering Tim's book, which I have with me. Here it is. Oh, he's got it too. Real quick, where's it available? Just so that our listeners can go check it out.
Yeah, you can find it on Amazon, or you can go to my website, which is Risen Ministries, risenmin.com. And I believe if you use a code Nephilim, all capitals, you can get 15% off.
Great. So for those who are listening on podcast, I just realized that I held up the book, and so did Tim, but I didn't actually say the name. It's called Fallen, the Sons of God and the Nephilim. Fallen, the Sons of God and the Nephilim. So you can check out the book. What we're doing is we're giving obviously we're not getting, it's like a 500-page book. So it is not a light reading, and he's put a lot of work into it. And in 4 episodes, there's no possible way that we can cover all of that ground, but we're giving kind of a bird's eye view, synopsis version in this 4-part series. And what we're doing is part 1, if you want to go back and watch that, was the origins of the Nephilim, covering the 3 primary, most popular views: the Sethite view, the fallen angel view, the royal view. And then part 2 was addressing how in the world could the Nephilim survive the flood? And wasn't that the whole purpose of God sending the flood, was to wipe them out? And so we talked about how do we have Nephilim on the earth in those days before the flood, the days of Noah and after. And then episode 3, we're now going to be talking about the giants, and particularly we're going to focus our attention on answering probably the biggest question that people usually use as their main objection to this fallen angel view. The fallen angels, sons of God, being angels, procreating with daughters of men and forming Nephilim that then come giants. The biggest objection is, well, angels can't procreate with women. So we're going to address that today, and then just address the giants in general and talk about different clans of giants and those kinds of things. And then our final episode 4, that'll be the next episode after this, will be a catch-all where we address questions that we've been getting in the YouTube comments and things that you might want answered. We'll use that as kind of a Q&A catch-all episode as the 4th part. So 4-part mini-series. First part is the 3 popular origins, different views for how the Nephilim originated in the first place. Second is how did they survive or return after the flood? And today is giants, and addressing angels, fallen angels, procreating with women. So all that being said, let's go ahead and hear from Tim. And I think we should maybe just start right there. Tim, how is it that angelic beings could procreate with humans?
Well, great question. Obviously, and we talked about it a little bit before the show, the Bible didn't give us a biology lesson on that until it gave us all the details of how they could. But it does tell us in this passage in Genesis 6, 1-4, if we're interpreting it correctly, it's telling us that they did. And so Scripture doesn't always tell us the how of certain things, especially when it comes to the supernatural or the preternatural. Some people prefer that terminology, but it just tells us this did happen. But there are some people who, like John MacArthur and some others, who would have taken the view that's kind of a combination between the fallen angel view and one of the natural views, where it's demons possessed men and then they did this. I don't hold that view because it doesn't tell us that. It just says the sons of God took wives, that they were the ones doing it, and the result of that was something unique with the Nephilim. And so I don't know that a demon possessed person having a relationship with a demon possessed man having a relationship with a woman would produce anything abnormal.
Yeah, at the biological level, because it would be a possessed man, but it would still be. Biologically, physically, it would still just be a man.
Right. Yeah. So I think something unique is happening here, where it is angels manifesting in obviously rebellious angels. I'm not saying these are good ones doing what they're supposed to be doing. No, they're leaving their proper abode, as Jude talks about, and they are cohabiting with women and producing offspring. So I think they take on human form, just like you see in Genesis 18, where the 2 angels came with the Lord, they talk to Abraham for a little bit, and then the Lord talks with Abraham. Then the two angels go down to Sodom to get Lot out of there. They can take him by the hand and drag him out of the city. And the men of the city saw them and apparently viewed them as men because they wanted to molest them. Of course, they were wicked people there. And other, so I think you have examples there where they're able to eat and drink with Abraham, and they're able to grab Lot by the hand, and so that they perform human functions. And why would we assume that they can't do more than just that?
Right. Yep. They eat. Yeah. There's human function happening. With that, I'm thinking of, I'm thinking a little bit about just angels in general. You and I were talking offline, and I'd love to pick your brain about this for a moment. But are there any female angels that the Bible references? Because it seems as though every single time an angel manifests, like in the case of Lot, or the three angels, and one of them is the angel of the Lord. And so my view is that, one of those was maybe Christ, not incarnate. It would be before Christ, coming to earth and taking on flesh, but maybe a theophany or a Christophany of Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing as, a fourth man, one who looked as though he was a son of God, in the fire. So I think of, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, same kind of thing. I think that was likely Jesus, a Christophany. But in the case of, the three angels, one of them being the angel of the Lord who visits Abraham, or the angels with Lot, or just, Michael or Gabriel, multiple instances of angels in the Bible, they all seem to be male. Can you speak to that a little bit? Are there female angels, or, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a good question too. And sometimes the Bible may just be silent on something, or maybe doesn't give us enough information to be certain about it. But Gabriel's a good example of what the last question too. When he appears to Daniel, it says in Daniel 9, the man Gabriel came to me. Well, he appears in the form of a man, and he's called a man. The angels at the tomb that first Easter morning, it says in Mark's gospel and also in Luke, refer to them as men.
Right.
Of course, we know they were angels, and I think doesn't Acts do that as well?
I can't remember.
At the Ascension,
Yep.
Two men in white,
they're male. Mm-hmm.
But they're angels, and so they appear as men and can be described that way. But as far as whether there are any female ones,
the only reference is Zechariah, right? But it doesn't seem to be a positive reference, and we can flesh that out. But go ahead and share with me and our listeners what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so in Zechariah, you have this vision of the basket that is carried by two storks to Babylon, and it's there are different ways to interpret that, but let's just focus on the vision itself a little bit. It refers to them in feminine form, so that as female. And most people think these are representing demons at that point. So you would have two demonic spirits, that they happen to be fallen angels, as we talked about last week. Then that would possibly be some sort of allusion or reference to maybe some angels are spoken of in the feminine. It's also just a vision, and so I don't want. Sometimes you got to be careful to read too much into it, and if demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim that we talked about last week, in our last episode, then I guess that wouldn't necessarily show whether there were angels that are female, but just that some of the Nephilim maybe would have been. So I think that's about as far as you can go on that passage. But you do have Hebrews, is it chapter 13, where it talks about how we should be hospitable to strangers, because some people have entertained angels unaware. That obviously Abraham was entertaining. I agree with you. That's likely a theophany or Christophany there, and then two angels. But I don't know that he was unaware of that. So I think it's referring to other people have at times encountered angelic messengers and welcomed them, and for who knows what purpose. I mean, obviously God has a purpose in doing it. Maybe perhaps they could appear in female form, that we just aren't given a clear example where they have been or where they did.
Right. One thing that's interesting about angelic beings is that there's no as far as we can tell, there's no federal headship. Like we have families here on earth with human beings and animal kind, that there are, even among lions, there would be a pride, and there's always going to be, silverback gorillas or a wolf pack or what. There's a head, and it's male. It's always going, it's male. And so with us, we have posterity. We have our descendants, our children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But with angelic beings, it doesn't seem as there's any, there may still be hierarchy among angelic beings, but there's not a federal headship where when Adam fell, all his posterity fell with him. Whereas angels, it seems like if they are to fall, that one angel falling wouldn't cause the whole angelic race, for lack of a better phrase, to fall with that particular angel, but that each angel.
Yeah, I heard one person put it this way: each angel is species unique, which I thought that was a interesting way to think of them. Because you're right, that when Satan rebels, it doesn't mean Michael does as well. It doesn't mean the rest of them. They make that decision whether they're going to or not.
Right. Yeah. So there's not that federal headship, and it seems as though multiple possible motivations, and so this does get into speculation. But in terms of why angels would want to procreate with the daughters of men, I was going to say earlier, one of the reasons why I find it not very compelling that it's simply angels possessing human men is because I think that one of their purposes was to corrupt the seed. It was to thwart this messianic promise that God spoke in the garden, and the serpent was there and spoke that that your seed, the seed of the woman, would one day crush his head. He's going to strike your seed's heel, your offspring's heel. There'll be enmity between your offspring and his, and the serpent will strike his heel, but your seed will crush his head. And so Satan had this understanding, this knowledge that through the woman, through the human line, eventually there would be a child who would be his ultimate destruction. And so the idea of just possessing a human being, a man, to then procreate with a human woman, there could be negative influence, negative moral influence, and these kinds of things, but it wouldn't in an ontological, objective sense thwart the promise, the line, the messianic line from which Christ would one day come. But if it's actually angelic seed and a hybrid and it's not even fully human anymore at this point, then that would pose a threat to a messianic human man-child that would be the ultimate demise of Satan. So I think I just think that that's one of the chief motivations for why these sons of God, fallen angels, did what they did. I don't think it was just to for pleasure or just to negatively influence humanity and tempt them to certain various forms of sin. I think there was an objective strategic aim of stopping the messianic promise. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's very possible. I don't know that the Bible gives that definitively, that that's exactly what they were trying to do. I mean, it does tell us that Genesis 6:2, that they saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, or that they were good.
That's true.
So that they, similar to in Genesis 3, Eve sees the fruit, that it was good and pleasing to the eye, that sort of thing. So there was a desire there, but it probably goes beyond just a longing or a lust or something like that. I agree that it's likely they were trying to corrupt the messianic line. In fact, there maybe is a hint in Genesis 6:9 where it talks about how Noah was a man blameless in his generations. That's the word blameless there in Hebrew is the same word that's used to describe the like the Passover lamb. Then you need to be without blemish. So in a sense, he is not tainted.
Right.
And
yeah, I've heard a lot of people
that
say
could be an indication that he doesn't have that in his lineage at all, whereas the others did.
Right.
Yeah, so I think that's very possible.
Did you know that fresh American black elderberries are naturally high in vitamin C, vitamin B6, phosphorus, and vitamin A, as well as many anthocyanins that serve as antioxidants? Regular supplementation with elderberry extracts has been shown to decrease chance of influenza and lessen cold duration and symptoms. The Kings Ridge fresh frozen elderberries are hand-picked, destemmed, washed, and quickly frozen at their family farm in East Central Indiana. The Kings Ridge is a quality-oriented family farm focused on building Christendom. Our friends Trevor and Autumn truly hope that their elderberry syrup and fresh frozen elderberries bless your family this cold and flu season. Don't buy dried European elderberries and support the global economic agenda. Instead, visit tkrfarm.com and purchase your elderberry needs from the Kings Ridge Elderberries. Again, that's tkrfarm.com. Would you like to get control of your money and set up a system that will guarantee for the rest of your life tax-protected compounding interest and growth? How about having 24/7 electronic access to your money for funding wisely chosen investments, home improvements, and other large expenditures without going to the mainstream banks? This is not a dream, but it could actually be a reality when working with our sponsor, Private Family Banking. See their contact information in the show notes below. To make this season even brighter, Private Family Banking is giving away a pair of tickets, a $500 value, for the upcoming Blueprints for Christendom 2.0 conference, which is taking place on March 1st, 2nd, and 3rd of 2024 in Taylor, Texas. To enter the ticket giveaway, join their email list by sending an email to banking@privatefamilybanking.com. Again, that's banking@privatefamilybanking.com with the subject line of your email saying tickets. Then include your full name and mailing address in the body of the email. The ticket giveaway entry period will end at midnight Central Time on February 13th, 2024, and the winner will be notified via email on February 14th. You must be 18 years of age or older to enter, and only one email per person can be entered into this giveaway drawing. So another verse that people use for objection to, the ability of fallen angels to procreate with the daughters of men is that Jesus says angels will not, angels will not be given to marriage in heaven. Do you remember that particular verse?
Yeah, Matthew 22:30 says, Jesus, this is the passage with the Sadducees, the woman marries a guy, he dies, she marries the brother, he dies, 7 times, who's she going to be married to? And then he says, you are mistaken, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God. And then verse 30, for in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like the angels of God in heaven. And so people look at that and say, well, there's no way, because the angels, what they say is they can't get married because that's what it just says there. Well, that's not what it says. Jesus doesn't say that. He says in heaven, they neither marry nor are given in marriage. And so he doesn't say anything about the ones who leave their proper abode and are rebelling.
I feel like that's so easy to counter by just saying, the ones in heaven don't do this. And it's also, the language is, this is what they don't do. And the language is not, this is what
go ahead.
Can't do.
Yeah. And what's interesting to me is if you look at the parallel passage in Luke, the same setup, and then he says, the sons of this age marry and are given in marriage, but those who are counted worthy to attain that age and the resurrection from the dead neither marry nor are given in marriage, nor can they die anymore, for they are equal to the angels and are sons of God, being sons of the resurrection. So it's interesting that Jesus refers to humans when we are glorified in the resurrection, when we have our resurrected bodies. Then we are equal to the angels and are what? And are sons of God at that point. So when it's fully realized, the idea that we're sons of God, it's almost as if he's given a little bit of a nod to what we would say for the fallen angel view, that the sons of God, they're angelic beings.
Right. Okay. Any other things that you want to add on this point?
On whether they could do that. No, they'll have to get the book in order to find the rest.
That's fair. That's fair. Okay, well then let's just talk a little bit about the giants. So correct me if I'm wrong. My understanding is you have you have sons of God, right? This divine counsel, and I think there's a lot of merit to that. The divine counsel view. So I'm not, I don't prescribe to everything that Michael Heiser, writes about, but the unseen realm, and I appreciate him, and I believe he's with the Lord now. He recently passed away, and I think he was faithful in many regards. He does have a particular disdain for Calvinism, and I do happen to be a Calvinist, so I would have some disagreements with Dr. Michael Heiser. Heiser.
He did with dispensationalism as well. So
okay, well there you go.
So he didn't. He probably wouldn't have liked either one of us.
There you go.
He was a nice man. So
yeah. I've watched some of his interviews, and really fascinating stuff. And you can tell he takes the scripture and languages very seriously. And so, but all that being said, the divine counsel kind of idea that, like God even saying, that's one of the big objections that people had to Heiser, that he, dared to, just entertain the possibility that let us make man in our image may not actually be Trinitarian language, which is always, typically assumed. I assume that. But this idea of God working with divine counsels, and that there are other gods, but not gods in the sense of infinite, or not gods that are creator gods, infinite gods. There is only one God. You are God above all the other gods, as we see in the scripture, King of kings, Lord of lords. But that there are these lesser, capital, lowercase g gods that God Himself created to function and to rule as vice regents with Him over the earth in different capacities and these kinds of things. And so you see that in Job, the first 2 chapters of Job, this divine counsel, and there are other places that speak of it as well. And so with all that being said, we start with sons of God being angelic beings, and then fallen sons of God, those who rebelled against Him and are now cast down to earth, that left their heavenly abodes or went down to earth. And then you have the offspring of fallen angels, sons of God, and daughters of men, human women, being Nephilim, and then from there, the next progression would be from the Nephilim, you then get the giants. Is that right? The right progression there?
Well, or that the Nephilim just are giants, and then you have the different clans from there. So like the Anakim and the Emim and those other ones that are mentioned. So
flesh that out a little bit. So the Nephilim themselves are giants, but they could also, the Nephilim could then have wives, human, wives, and their children would likely be giants as well, but each time maybe a little bit less pure in terms of...
presuming that they are that the Nephilim themselves are marrying human women, there's the possibility, I think we probably touch on this in our next one, that maybe some of the offspring of the sons of God and daughters of men would be female, and so then you could have Nephilim male and female marrying. I see. Yeah, either option would be, I think, are plausible with Scripture.
Okay, that's really helpful. I did not think about, of course that makes sense, but I didn't think about that possibility of one Nephilim and another Nephilim, and we're going to keep the bloodline pure, which is funny to say because it's 50%, 50-50.
Not very pure.
Right, but is, at least, keeping it at the 50%, percentage rather than 25 and then, 12.5. And so, okay, so let's talk about giants. And so my perspective is that, that you had, initial... So I do think, and we've talked about this in our second episode, but different kinds of angels, species unique. Each one could have been unique with different traits and different abilities or different knowledges, and able to pass those things down, to teach certain things, and technology even. And not only that, I personally think that, that it's possible that within that realm that, some Nephilim, but depending on who that fallen angel father might have been, could have been larger than others in terms of their physical stature and size. And so with all these things, and then multiple incursions, that, you could have very large giants in the, antediluvian, pre-flood days, but then also large giants again in the time of, Moses or Abraham or even Joshua and the conquest of Canaan. But it does seem like the giants eventually begin to kind of peter out. And so my view is that, by the time you get to King David and Goliath, for instance, it seems like these are just the leftovers from Joshua, because I just taught through Joshua in our church this year, and going verse by verse, and it says, Joshua defeated multiple different clans in Canaan, one of them being the Anakim, and defeated them from this region to that region and cleared them out to where the only ones that lived, he put most of them to the edge of the sword. The only ones that lived went to Gaza, Gath, and one other place.
Ashdod.
What is it?
Ashdod.
And,
I think that's Judges 11:21 or Joshua 11:21. I think.
Yeah. Right, and then lo and behold, you find Goliath, from Gath, and so. But I think by the time you get to David, to me, my assessment is that Goliath is, he's multiple generations removed from Anak. He's in that line, the Anakim, and Anak, his father was Arba, a man of renown that could be, I think, could be a Nephilim, but that's the plural. What do we call it? A Naphil. That could Naphil. So Arba could be a Naphil, but by the time you get to Goliath, I view that as Goliath might be one of the smaller giants. But I think this is where you and I would maybe differ. That you think no, Goliath is on par for that. Giants only got so big. Could we talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. You also have David's mighty men fighting against. It says there was war in Gath, and that's where you have these other giants that are mentioned that David's mighty men killed. So Goliath's brothers or his descendants, depending on how that gets translated. And then they do seem to disappear after that point. But yeah, they were all Gaza, Gath, Ashdod, that area. They were the only ones that were left that Joshua didn't wipe out or drive out of the land. And I think that's instructive because you have at the same time one of the battles with David's mighty men kills an Egyptian man, and it's called him a man of measure or a man of stature, but it says he's 5 cubits tall, so that would be roughly 7.5 feet tall. A little bit taller than me. Joel and I got to meet. He knows I'm right. I'm pretty large. 6'9". Yep. Yeah. But he's not called a giant, this Egyptian guy. So at 7.5 feet, he's not identified in that way at all. So he just seems to be a very tall person, like we have very tall people today. He's not identified with any of those tribes or anything. So he seemed to be different, just a normal human.
That's a great point, though. I didn't think because people say, well, ancient Israelites were 5'2", and so when they went up against the Canaanites, these could have just been people who were 5'11", or 6 feet tall, and to them it was giants, But that's a great point to say, no, here's a guy who's not from one of the giant clans, and so he's not named a giant. He's just called a man of stature or a tall man, and a tall man is 7.5. And if that's the case, then what do you think a giant is? It's got to be bigger than that.
Yeah, and the whole idea that the ancient Israelites were only 5'2", that nearly everybody who does that cites one book, one of the handbooks to the Old Testament. I end up getting that exact edition, and that is in the very beginning of the book. It's like the first or second paragraph where it says, here's the average Jewish person at that time. No footnote, no documentation. It's just stated, and everybody cites that one thing. I think it comes from one cemetery from the Old Testament time. One of the times of the Old Testament, I should say, and they averaged the height of the people there. But there have been other studies where there was a cave that they found a bunch of remains of humans from about the 13th century BC, so like the period of Judges, and reconstructing based on jaw size and everything, they estimate the average Israelite at that time was about 5'6". So it's a little bigger, and that's male and female combined. It's not just the average man.
Right.
So maybe not quite as short as everybody thinks.
Yeah.
But going back to... Yeah, and I document that in the book, so that's if people are wondering where that comes from. The going back to Joshua's time and Moses' time, you've got Og, which we needed to get to him and talk about him. It's all this interesting verse. What is that? Deuteronomy 3:10 and 11 talks about how once they killed Og of Bashan, it says his bedstead was still there. So his bed was left over. It was iron. Not just a normal wooden one or something. Maybe it's stressing that it was iron because he was really big and needed something strong.
Right.
But it tells us how big it was and in cubits. So it'd be 9 cubits by 4 cubits, so about 13.5 feet by 6 feet. And so if he was as tall as his bed was long, so 13.5 feet, that makes him exactly twice my height. And so it makes for a good, a good illustration, I guess. So if he was, let's go with that he's 13.6. If he were built to my proportions, and maybe he's even stronger, thicker, I don't know. But right now I'm around 230 pounds. So he would be, you don't just double my weight, you have to multiply it by 8. So you have to double the height, double the depth and the breadth. So you multiply my weight by 8. So you get up to, about 1,800 pounds at 13 and a half feet. Is that possible for a human to be that size? Well, the skeletal structure can hold the weight, just because of the compressive strength. The bone is pretty strong if you're just standing there. But once you start moving and you get the torsion and things moving, it becomes pretty difficult for as you get bigger and bigger than that. Like you see some pictures on the internet. Oh, they were 30, 40, 50 feet tall. Well, imagine 27 feet tall. You have to double Og's height. Then you multiply that other weight, roughly 1,800 pounds, by 8. And then you're looking at somebody who is not a math major, but I think around 7 tons. Mm-hmm. And it's just, it pretty quickly seems out of the realm of possibility. Now, I know some people. And
you're saying it's out of the realm of possibility because the bone structure couldn't support it?
I don't know if it's just the bone as much as also the organs and everything else. I know some people say, but we're dealing with entities that are part supernatural being as well. And that's true. So maybe that plays into it where they could be larger. Maybe that 12, 13 foot range is more of the upper limit. Right. So there's an old Egyptian, it's not a document, it's a writing that was found, but I think it was called Craft of the Scribe, and it talked about the Shasu people which is in the land of Canaan, and they were afraid of them. And they talked about how they were, when you work it out according to the Egyptian cubit, they would be 8'7" from nose to toe. So from here down. Okay. But that would still been close to Moses' time, and or be a little bit before Moses, I think. And there's an illustration or a relief that's been found where they captured 2 of these Shasu, and they have a picture of them kneeling down before all of the Egyptians, which is pretty interesting. Usually when you see like the Egyptian reliefs, the pharaoh is the one who's really big. Right. In this one, the 2 spies are kneeling down, and they're a little bit taller kneeling, and they're kind of squatting even more than that, than the Egyptians who are around them, who are beating them and have them held captive. So if you were to scale them up, they look like they'd be about 9 to 10 feet, which is consistent with what you have with Goliath. So maybe Og is the upper range, 13 and a half. And when you go beyond there, it seems very difficult to conceive of, a human form that's 7 tons or more.
It's definitely difficult to conceive. I'll give you that. But in terms of just the mechanics, I guess, just physically, so hard to imagine a 30-foot tall dude. I definitely agree with that. But I guess my question,
the heart pumping hard enough to get the blood back from the feet all the way up, 20 some feet to where the heart is again.
Totally. But a much larger heart. So and help me understand, because I'm no scientist, but like to me, it's like, it's okay. So the blood's got to pump all the way down to the toes. You got a 20-foot range, so a lot of the, or like you said, 7 tons of weight, and not just standing still like a skyscraper or a tower, but this is a person that's moving, walking, running, chasing at certain points. So all those things, totally get it. That for me, I'm just, again, I'm not a scientist, so I don't see. I guess I just don't see the problems with if everything is, like if you've got today, there are guys who, where it's really it's not a positive thing. It's a detriment that somebody is 8+ feet tall, and they usually have to have some kind of brace or cane or something like that. But I don't think that Goliath did, and he would be even taller at 9'9". But today when people have certain ailments because they're very very tall, very large, it's because it's disproportional in my understanding. But if somebody is fully proportional to it, the blood's got to go 20 feet from the heart to the toes, but that heart is proportional for that size. But it's a massive heart, and it's and the bones are massive bones. And is there any reason, like what do you? It's hard to imagine a 30-foot tall person, sure, but from a physical standpoint, what are the problems with that?
Yes, I'm just thinking about like a giraffe or something. So the bull giraffe is can get up to about 18 feet tall, but they have to have special features in their anatomy, like their skin is super tight, which helps force the blood back up from the legs. And in order to get back to the heart I think is like 2 feet long. They have to have a special thing below their brain, so that when they bend down to drink, the blood doesn't just rush all the way in there and just blast their brain.
Oh, okay.
So there's certain physiological things that have to be in place, and maybe that sort of thing would, the bigger you get. But I do think there's a limit because of our physiology.
Okay.
And I don't know exactly what that number is. I
see what you're saying.
Yeah, I think once you get beyond the 13, it really becomes extreme. But again, because there is a bit of supernatural involved there, maybe it allows for more. And I think even if, let's say that Og were twice my height, and we're going to say that he has to be to my dimensions, I think there's probably a little bit of streamlining going on. So rather than being exactly 8 times my weight, maybe it's more like 7 or 7.5. But anyways, it pretty soon gets pretty hard to fathom.
Yeah. Massive.
But either way, I mean, a 10-foot tall person is going to look incredibly huge.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. So at the time of recording this, we're still early November, but I have already set up my Christmas tree because I can't wait. The Webben family, we're big fans of Christmas, and but we have a 9-foot tree, and I was looking at it last night, and I was like, just imagining like if that was a person, I was like, yeah, that's a big dude. That's 9 feet is huge. It really is, and so I hear you. What do you? So I guess with Amos, they were as tall as the cedars. What is it? The Amalekites, I think, is what. The Amalekites. Yeah,
it's the only time they're ever called giants in the Bible. It was Amos 2:9, I think. And
that's it.
How they're like the height as of cedars or strength as the oak or something like that. And I think there's some figurative language going on there. They're huge, and right. It just
and the Bible uses figurative language. It doesn't have to be literal, but I did look into in summer, like 60 to 100 feet, 120 feet tall. But I looked into like cedars in that particular region and what people think at that time, and 30 to 40 is most of what I could find.
Well, and you have the spies talking about how we were like grasshoppers in their sight.
Right.
So if we take that super literally, a grasshopper is like an inch or two big, and and
that one would be, if you take that literally, then that kind of blows the Amos 2:9 cedar passage out of the water.
But if you are, if you're 5'6" or 5'8", and you're standing next to somebody who's 10 feet tall, I mean, I've got a picture in my book, I think, of Robert Wadlow, the tallest man in modern times, who 8'11" 3/4", I think he got to, standing next to his dad, who was 5.5 feet or something, and it just he makes him look so puny because of how massive this guy is, and he's not even twice the height.
All right, everybody's been asking, can I live stream your conference? And the answer is a resounding no. You will be there in person, or you will not be there at all. I'm just kidding. You actually can live stream the conference. We're excited to announce we're making it available to anybody and everybody who wants to watch this conference right as it's happening, which is March 1st and 2nd. That's a Friday and Saturday of 2024. What conference am I even talking about? It's called Blueprints for Christendom 2.0. We've got Pastor Douglas Wilson. We've got Dr. Joe Boot. We've got Brian Sauvé. We've got Eric Kahn. And then, of course, yours truly, Joel Webben. We've got 7 primary sessions in the conference, each one being probably 50 to 60 minute long sessions, lectures, sermons, whatever you want to call them, and then 2 live panels, each being an hour and a half long. Now, one of the panels is on biblical patriarchy. We're going to have Pastor Douglas Wilson available for that panel, and we decided to get Eric Kahn, because Eric Kahn, biblical patriarchy, let's just be honest, it's a sensitive topic, but Eric Kahn, I think, is known as one of the most nuanced, careful, and sensitive individuals, especially on the Twitter streets. So we're going to have him as a part of that panel. It'll go really well. Then the second panel is Haunted Cosmos live show. You've got Brian Sauvé and Ben Garrett talking about the most unhinged things imaginable, hopefully some things that are actually true truthful. Now, there will be some truthful things. They're going to stick to Scripture, and when they speculate, and you know they will, they'll at least let you know that it's speculation, and they won't pass it off as though it's in the infallible Word of God. So, live stream this conference. How do you do it? Go to patreon.com/Right Response Ministries. Again, that's patreon.com/Right Response Ministries. A lot of guys charge $50, $60, $80. We are asking that you would simply partner with us for $10 a month. And let's be real, you could do it 1 month, live stream all the content, and then cancel your subscription. And if you do, no harm, no foul. If you want to stick with us and support this ministry and what God's doing through Right Response, then praise God. That's great, and we thank you. Either way, technically, it's only $10, right? Here's one other question I have about just birthing. So some people say, well, how could angels procreate with, women? But another question is like, well, how could a woman give birth to, a baby that's going to be 9'9", or possibly in the case of Og, or, like 13, 14, like how is it that human women could give birth to a giant? What do you think about that?
So let me turn the question around on you real quick. Do you know how big you were when you were born? Your weight?
Yeah, 8 pounds. I think I was 8'8" or 8'9".
Oh, I was 8'5", so you were bigger than me.
There you go.
But who's bigger today?
You.
Yeah. So even if this baby's going to be a giant, it doesn't necessarily mean that the size at birth is going to be considerably larger. But I've got a friend who's I think their 8th baby was 12 pounds at birth. We went to see him in the hospital, and our son, who's just turned 21 now, he was a little boy at the time. We said, "Hey, Judah, look at the little baby." It's not a little baby; it's like a toddler sitting there, and he was newborn at 12 pounds. So even if somebody my size was 8 pounds and 5 ounces at birth, you could have somebody who's going to end up being, several feet taller than me, who wouldn't have to be a lot bigger at birth.
Right. Yeah. That's okay. I'm glad to hear you said. That's what I've always thought was that, and just looking at like, like the largest baby ever born, and looking at some of those facts, like, you can have a 12-pound baby. I have a friend who was 11 pounds, 2 ounces, 12 pounds. You've got that story. So, and looking at some of the largest babies that were born, all the way up to close to 20 pounds, 18 to 20 pound babies. And that's certainly not ordinary or regular, but it can happen. And so then you think like, okay, well, so let's say, cut the difference and go a little bit smaller than, but like 15, 16 pound babies. And that doesn't even factor in, if these babies have angelic fathers who know things about, life and medicine and all these, like, what about, because we're just discussing, full term babies at 8'5" who grow up to, 8 pounds, 5 ounces that grow up to be 6'9", such as yourself. There's also the possibility of early births that premature, that these angelic fathers could have said, okay, that's it. It's been 6 months. We're not going to go full 10, like we're going to take the baby out now. We know how to do this, and so the baby's coming out premature at, where if it was a normal size baby by today's standards, at 6 months, that baby would very likely only be, we just had one baby in our church that was premature by about, I believe it was about 2 months early. So about 7 months. No, it was earlier than that. It was like 20 weeks. So about half. So like 4.5 months in the NICU for quite a long time. But close to 20 weeks, like 23, 24, something like that.
Okay.
And the baby was tiny, like I think like 2 pounds. And but the baby is alive. The baby is here. And obviously we have certain technology that people didn't in the past, but having an angelic father and some, I would imagine that they would have some special abilities and skills and knowledges and stuff like that. So, so anyways, my point is just to say that, you could have an 8 pound, 5 ounce baby such as yourself that grows to be 6'9", and that's, full term. Why not a 12 pound baby or a 15 pound baby? And again, that being full term, what about a 12, 15 pound baby that's at 6 months, not even full term, and the angelic fathers say, all right, it's time to deliver the child early. And like now I feel like The sky's the limit. Cedar trees are back on the menu, Tim. We can do it. We can get 30-foot. We can get 30-foot giants. So, anyways.
Well, yeah. Or if you have women that are, or female giants at some point,
Right.
then just that.
Problem solved.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, a lot of that is speculation. We don't know the growth chart. Right. Are they 99th percentile the day that they're born, and from then on. We just simply don't know all those things.
So, any more thoughts on fallen angels procreating with women? Or
let's real quickly tackle. You hinted at a little bit ago, and I cover it in the book in one of the objections, because as I mentioned to you before, any view that is correct has to be able to address its objections and answer those. And I've noticed many times people who hold to the Sethite view will never touch the objections. They will just attack the fallen angel view and think that they've done their homework. And no, there are significant textual issues with that view that need to be addressed, and I never hear people addressing them. But one objection to the fallen angel view is, like in Genesis 1, it talks about how they bring forth after their kind. And so how can humans and angels, if they're different kinds, how can that happen? Well, a couple things to keep in mind. One, the Bible never says humans will bring forth after their kind. That's referring to the plants and the animals. I'm not saying that humans don't. I'm just stating a fact. The Bible never uses that terminology when it comes to humans. But secondly, if angels are also made in God's image, so when God says, if what you were talking about earlier with Dr. Heiser saying that this divine counsel, Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image. If that's not Trinitarian language, if he is speaking to the angels, then they are made in God's image as well. And if we are made in God's image, then would that preclude, if both have the Imago Dei, then perhaps when they appear in human form, if they appear as humans, it's not a violation of kind.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Any other thoughts on
I've got lots on that, but I want to talk about giants. And I mean, there's some cool stuff in there when we get into Joshua and Judges, or Joshua, I should say. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead. Talk about giants. So.
Yeah. So you talked earlier about I've got a chapter called Giant Speculation. So I'm going to tell you what I'm just speculating rather than just trying to be sensationalistic or something. That's not the goal of the book. It's to be as I mentioned before in earlier episodes, a serious Bible study. But one of the things that was pretty cool, you talked about how Joshua drove them out. The Anakim from everywhere except for Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. Well, it doesn't mean every single one of them was killed. Some of them were killed, some fled. And what I found really interesting is you do have these legends of giants in different cultures around the world. You have, the Greeks have something similar to this, where you have the gods coming down and having affairs with women and producing demigods, and sometimes they're described as giants. Like Orion and others. And you have in the Norse mythology, the same sort of thing. But one story that I think is really interesting is the Odyssey by Homer. It's about the Battle of Troy ends, and you have Odysseus or Ulysses, depending on your translation there, is trying to get home. And that's what the whole book of the Odyssey is about. He's trying to get home. And so he's got a fleet of 21 ships. So they leave from Troy, and there was a real battle of Troy. I'm not saying everything in the Odyssey is historical record. That's not what I'm going for here. But there was a real battle of Troy. What if there really was a guy named Odysseus who's trying to get home and had a lot of problems getting back? So he's got a fleet of 21 ships, and the first island they stop at, so this would be somewhere in the Mediterranean, Eastern Mediterranean, it's called the island of the Listrygonians. And they go to, some of his men are sent up to the ruler of the island, and he's a giant, and he takes two of the men and dashes them against the ground and starts eating them. And then the rest of the guys flee, try to get back to the ships. The giants run out, and they start spearing the men like fish. They destroy 20 of the ships, all but one of them, and it's Odysseus's. He gets away with just one ship left. The rest are killed and eaten by giants. The next island he gets to is the island, this is the one most people know about, the island of the Cyclops. And here you have a giant who wants to eat people. And he traps Odysseus in his cave with some others for a little while, and they escape. And then you have the rest of the Odyssey. So I find that interesting because in Numbers chapter 13, when the spies return from the land, they talk about how it's a great land. Here's its produce. They got the grapes and everything, and they're telling it's truly is a land flowing with milk and honey. Joshua and Caleb are like, let's go. And then the other 10 are like, no, it's a land that devours its inhabitants. And they start trying to dissuade the people from going. They're scared because the people there are giants. There we saw the Nephilim, or we saw the Nephilim. They're the Anakim are of the Nephilim. And so they're trying to scare the people not to go in. But that one phrase they used is really interesting to me, that the land it's a land that devours its inhabitants. And if you read commentaries, a lot of times they'll say things like, it's a land that's been ravaged by war back and forth. And I'm thinking, well, if you're the Israelites, isn't that great? The people are weakened because they've been fighting all the time. Let's go take them. And so they have all sorts of different interpretations. What if we just take that in a very straightforward way? When they're talking about the giants, it devours its inhabitants. What if the giants are eating people, and that's what scares the rest of the Israelites to death?
Right.
We don't want to go, because in the next chapter, Joshua and Caleb are still trying to persuade them, like, don't disobey God. Let's go. They will be meat for us. They use that phrase. So it's almost as if you had a cannibalism going on there. So you had these giants who are eating people. If you were one of the giants and you fled rather than getting killed by Joshua's armies, where would you flee? The Israelites are coming from the south and from the east, meaning you would go north or west, which is the Mediterranean Sea. And about 100 to 200 years after Joshua, you have the Battle of Troy. Is it possible that we're getting some sort of legendary embellishment of something that really happened at the beginning of the Odyssey? And maybe the giants eating humans. For the record, I don't eat humans.
Well, you're not a giant. You're 6'9". You don't make the cut.
Right. But you have the same sort of idea throughout so many different stories, even something as like Jack and the Beanstalk. The giant one, I smell the blood of an Englishman. He wants to eat people. Yeah. And where do the giants live? Halfway between heaven and earth. They're part heaven, part earth. So there's just a whole bunch of stories, mythology that all line up pretty well with that idea. And I think that they're distortions or ideas that are borrowed from reality.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I think there's a lot of things like that. Personally, I think there's a lot of myths that sure are probably off on some of the details or embellished in some regard, but I think there are a lot of myths that point towards the fact that it's not that we all have one shared conscience, but as some have presupposed, but that we all did come from one family, that we all twice from Adam and then from Noah, and so the fact that there's a flood narrative with every different people group on the planet virtually, like, has some kind of in there. If they have history that goes back that far, whether it be oral tradition or written, there's just certain building blocks that you find universally across the board. Flood, giants, like this and that, or like demigods, which part God, and part who mated with some woman, and it's half God, half man kind of thing. Like you said, Orion. It's like the Bible. I think the Bible addresses this. I think these things they're not only myths. I think a lot of things that we chalk up to legend and myth are probably actually historical accounts told maybe in an extra entertaining manner based off of a certain culture and their customs and the way that they would share history. But I don't think these things are just made up, stories.
Yeah,
right.
I agree. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, any other nifty tidbits about giants that you want to share?
I mean, I'd have to look at the table of contents again, but yeah, I mean, just going back to the spies for a little bit, because so many times people will say, well, they were just lying to the people. No, the narrator, Moses, tells us earlier in the chapter that the Anakim were there, and he names 3 of them. So I don't think that you can just dismiss that passage as they were just lying. No, they told the report of the land, and then they tried to scare the people. And
right.
So they weren't lying about seeing the giants there.
A bad report is not the same as a false report.
Right. And I think we may have mentioned that before, but I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
I hammered that, because I hear that a lot, and it's like, no, you have to deal with it because Moses tells us they were there.
Yep. And then one other thing that I think that would be worth talking about, but chapter 26 in your book, The Conquest, Genocide or Giantside, is the title of that chapter. I think I know what you're getting at there in terms of a lot of people sometimes see certain commands that God gave to the Israelites to wipe out entire nations, and they see it as inhumane and unloving and this and that and the other. And it does, one, God would be perfectly just within the boundaries of his justice as a divine decree. We would operate by, I'm not a pacifist, but I would operate by the certain, characteristics of just war theory and things like that today, because I don't have, and we don't have, nations don't have a divine decree from God to do that. So we try to fight just wars for just reasons after diplomatic measures have been taken to the utmost, and all these, and one of the characteristics of just war theory is that the battle has to be winnable. You don't do suicide missions, and so all those things. So one, God would be just within his rights from a divine decree offered to the Israelites to wipe out an entire nation. It would be fair on God's part, but just for good measure, cherry on top. What if that nation wasn't, not only were they bad or immoral, but what if they weren't even fully human? Is that part of what you're getting at with giantside versus genocide?
Yeah, because this is one of the arguments that a lot of skeptics will, they camp out on this over and over again. Oh, you worship a God who tells his people to go and wipe out all of these men, women, and children, and torture them. Which he never says to torture, but they embellish this, and they think that they're dismantling our view of God by focusing on this passage or on these passages in Joshua about the conquest, but they are lacking a lot of context. One, you have when God appears to Abraham, tells him, I'm going to give you this land and your descendants, but they're going to go down to a land that's not their own for 400 years and serve them, and then they'll be back because the iniquity of the Amalekites is not yet complete. So God's giving these people 400 years. Well, he's patiently waiting and giving them an opportunity to turn, and they don't, and they're getting more and more and more wicked. So it's not as if he just on a whim one day said, oh, go kill all these people. No, these are people who are doing all sorts of exceedingly wicked things, including child sacrifice and more. But one detail that I think people miss out on is Moses was told in Deuteronomy, tell the Israelites when they go to this land, if it's some of the peoples that are far off, you can make a peace treaty with them, and they can serve you. But these nations, and he names the ones where the giants are, these are the ones you're going to wipe out. And then what you see in Joshua after Jericho, which, they did wipe out men, women, and children there, the places where they kill men, women, and children where it's specified are the places where the giants were. And is it possible that was one of the purposes of the conquest, just like the flood we were talking about earlier, so the two cases the skeptics use all the time to attack God's character, saying, look, he performed genocide at the flood. No, that wasn't genocide. That was judgment on every single human, not except for 8. It wasn't just one lineage or one quote unquote race. It was everybody. That's judgment. And in this case, it's these people groups that seem to have giants among them that God says, take them out. After waiting patiently for 400 years, the places where they didn't, they're still around in David's time and still creating a problem. And so I think they missed that. That's why that chapter, genocide or giantside.
Great. Yep. I tend to think the same thing. Well, let's go ahead and land the plane now for this episode. We'll do the same thing that we've done in the last 2, give you an opportunity to tell people where they can follow you. Again, plug the book. But how can people follow? Because you write regularly, right? And so how can people follow you, and where can they get your book if they want to look at more?
Yeah, so the book is available on Amazon, like I mentioned before, and it's also on my own website, which is risenmin.com. That's my newer website. I have an older one where I have a blog that I do update somewhat regularly, not as much as I want to, but that's midwestapologetics.org. That's an older one, but that's where my blog still is. But you can get to that from the Risen Ministries page as well. So they can follow some of my stuff there, or my author page on Facebook. They could find me on there.
Great.
Did I miss something?
No, that's it. Well, thank you so much.
I was going to say, actually, we could talk real quickly if you don't mind. They could find some of my work on Answers in Genesis as well. But as we mentioned before, that's not a official, what we're talking about here is not, representing Answers in Genesis is my own thing. And Joel, I got to ask you, now that we're on the thing, what did you think of your trip to the Ark and the museum?
It was great. It was awesome. We went for the Fight Laugh Feast conference, and I was just going to go and attend myself, but I was like, there's no way I can tell my kids that, Daddy's going to Noah's Ark and they don't get to come. So we made it a whole family event, and it was amazing. It was really, really well done. It was the thing I kept thinking the whole time was it was just encouraging. A lot of times Christians do things poorly. So it was really cool to see Christians do something with excellence, like all of it, the Creation Museum and the Ark, but especially the Creation Museum. As we were walking around on the grounds and outside and stuff, I was thinking, it reminded me of the San Diego Zoo when I used to live in San Diego, and thinking this really is done with excellence. Like the worldview is entirely different than the worldview that secular humanist would hold, but in terms of this being something that's professional and well done, it was awesome, and the kids loved it, so that was great. So we had a great time.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I say it all the time. It's so fun to be working with a team that they believe, like I do, that we should do everything as unto the Lord, and so we're trying to give them our best and everything. And it's just what a privilege and a blessing it is to be part of a group like that. So I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. It was really good to meet you in person.
Yeah, great to meet you too. And one day, I'll just keep looking forward to the day when Ken adds the Nephilim exhibit. And it's not going to happen.
That'll be when I give it like $1 million donation.
Yeah. All right. Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. And I'm looking forward to our last, fourth and final episode that we'll do sometime in the near future.
Okay. Sounds great. Joel, thanks for having me.